Star Wars Acolyte is taking the galaxy deep into the dark side. But what does that actually mean? And why are Star Wars games dying? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
I want to open this with a discussion around Mandalorian and its place in Star Wars, first off, because that'll give us some context about what we're going to be talking about with the Acolyte.
All right.
So, Mandalorian was the big reveal when it came out. It was huge. Everyone didn't know Star Wars could be this kind of Star Wars. And it launched in the midst of the sequel trilogy and was this good flavor of the original trilogy that we knew and loved, and some of the new stuff that we saw in the sequel trilogy. So it was this good meld of the two things.
Yeah, it was this super unique take on everything that we know of Star Wars, but also very different than the normal Star Wars stories that we usually get.
Yes. It's like they shook up the Star Wars movies and then threw it all together into a Mandalorian show.
Yeah, it's like they changed the focus on who we're looking at and made them they made him a bounty hunter. And we've always wanted to see something about that kind of more seedy side of Star Wars and just see someone just trying to make it through the galaxy, you know? So it was a really good take.
It was. And now, though, it's changed quite a bit. The landscape of Star Wars is very different. While we had continuing Star Wars movies going on alongside The Mandalorian, that eventually stopped. And now we don't have any Star Wars movies except for those that are on the horizon, and we only have TV shows. But what The Mandalorian did was started this core piece to keep Star Wars alive, which it did very successfully. And while each season has kind of dropped in viewership, I think with The Mandalorian and Grogu movie, it's going to be really interesting to see where Mandalorian can go into the future. And I think we might see an exclusive movie place for the Mandalorian characters. That leads us to Star Wars The Acolyte. Acolyte sounds really awesome. Its focus is around the dark side, at least in terms of the main character. Not necessarily Sith, but dark side user as the main focus, the underdog in this situation. Well, Mandalorian was this placeholder or key core to Star Wars. I think going forward, we're going to see Mandalorian exclusively in the theaters, and we're going to see Acolyte take up the banner of the Mandalorian. And this is cemented, it's backed up at least, by this rumor that internally they're thinking of Star Wars Acolyte as a show that can go on multiple seasons. And this is a rumor that's been around forever, but more recently they said, the rumors at least, that internally they have greenlit a season 2, dependent on season 1's success. So I want to talk to you about what do you think of The Mandalorian going just to the movies and then Acolyte taking up this banner in a very different way?
As all shifts and changes are, they're always a little scary. You never really know what you're getting into. I think my initial gut reaction, though, is that this is a good move. I think Mandalorian has come to a point of belovedness where it needs to be more focused. It needs to be more given that time to really make good stories with it, because we want to see good stories with these characters that we have already fallen in love with. It'll be very interesting to see if they can deliver on a new quote unquote Mandalorian TV show with the Acolyte. I'm just so curious as to what this show's going to look like.
Yeah, I think they're giving themselves a good lead in terms of Mandalorian. It followed, like you said, a character, or at least a type of character that we wanted to see more of. A Mandalorian bounty hunter, Boba Fett, that we all wanted to see more stories on. This was a net new character that we got to see basically our dreams and theories and fun stories that we all told to each other on the screen for the first time. And now I think we're in that area specifically with the dark side. The dark side is something that everyone has been itching at the bit to get more of. We've got the Battlefront 2 campaign that was pitched as this dark side story. It didn't end up being the dark side story that we all expected it to be. There was quite a shift very early on of Iden Versio going to the light side.
Right.
Now, the book, the Battlefront 2 Inferno Squadron book, focused on what I think the campaign initially pitched itself to be. But as we've talked about, the funnel of Star Wars, most people see the movies, second most people see the TV shows, and then third would probably be video games, very closely with the TV shows. And then obviously it's animated, and then the books and the comics. So we've got that funnel there. Most people didn't read the book. The majority of Star Wars fans that love Battlefront 2 probably didn't read the book. A lot of first-person shooter players just don't play the campaign, so that even dwindles it down slightly. But with Star Wars, a lot of people, I know several people that bought Battlefront 2 specifically for the campaign, didn't have any intentions of playing the multiplayer.
Oh, well.
So it's kind of different in the Star Wars space. But we have this funnel of Star Wars. We have a lack of the kind of content that people have been wanting to see. Everyone forever has been wanting to see more dark side focused stories.
Yeah.
So just like The Mandalorian was fulfilling this dream of seeing Mandalorian bounty hunter stories, I think we're there with the dark side.
I would agree. I think that it's definitely going to be a topic that we all want to see. With the Battlefront campaign, though, it also kind of makes me worried. Not that I think they're going to do the same thing, but there is still that potential that it could, especially because they're not making this like they're not specifically saying Sith, and they're not specifically saying anything about it. It's just like it's dark side
ambiguous
stuff.
Dark side, darker kind of story.
It's like, what does this mean?
That doesn't worry me. What worries me, it seems like Disney, and maybe that has bled into Lucasfilm, have this aversion to dark side in canon. We have very few canon stories told from the perspective of the dark side. There's a few. I'm not saying there aren't any, but compared to Legends, there are way fewer dark side-led stories.
That's true.
Which that kind of gives me some hesitance. Like, will they actually do the story that people want? That, I think, will be very dependent on if it does continue as a series. Because if you're going to have rumors of it being around the dark side, if you're going to have the director go on stage at Star Wars Celebration and talk about how this is Kill Bill meets Frozen, and how, if you think about it, the underdog of this era are the dark side, and them wanting to tell that kind of story. If you have all these things and then you end up not having a core piece of what you told people will be in the story, if that's not there, that's where things get shaky.
Yeah.
Do I think that they're necessarily going to do that? Probably not. I think now that they have this big revitalization of the movies, that they are going to go to the movies again, now that streaming services have kind of gotten less favorable for these big companies, unless you're Netflix. Everyone's fighting for second or third place. They aren't fighting for first anymore just because you can't beat Netflix. No. Netflix is Netflix. But now that you have this thing, I think that it lends some more creativity. Well, I feel like the television shows have gotten away from the creativity in terms of experimenting, and the movies took a little bit more of that. If you look at Solo and Rogue One, those were the experimental stuff, and then they kind of played it relatively safe with the TV shows. I think we could see this future where that switches, where you have the TV shows be the more experimental thing, fill in the gaps, have more Andor-like experiences.
Yeah.
And then you have the more Mandalorian, the more bigger scale stuff in the movies.
I'll be very curious to see where they go with, if they do go more experimental.
Mm-hmm.
Disney and Lucasfilm, I feel like they're just kind of trying to make people happy.
They're very nostalgia focused.
Yes. In a way, I actually think it's a really good thing that they are already perhaps greenlighting a second season.
Yes.
I feel like that gives these creators...
At least happy with the idea of possibly maybe doing a second season.
Right. Like, I hope that gives these creators just more freedom to think longer term.
Yes.
To think of a story that's going to continue, or I don't know. I really haven't heard much about like the creation of this new TV series.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hopeful that they are thinking more longer term, especially if this is going to take the place of Mandalorian.
Yes. So you have a lot of like the entertainment space realizing that people want more intentional stories. You have this idea of people wanting an investment that is longer. I feel like people are less interested in stories or TV shows or even movies that don't have a continuation or don't have a longer term vision around it. I would be much more interested in a season of a show if I know it's going to continue.
Yeah.
If I know I can be invested in this, if I can make this part of my personality,
Right.
then I would be in something that's like, oh yeah, I watched that show. Oh yeah, how was it? It was pretty good, but it was only one season.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're, as a society, moving back to this idea of like long-running television shows. Like we're getting closer to this perspective of like we want, and hopefully we will get more of these longer stories that we can be invested in.
I agree and disagree.
Okay.
I think that we do want, yes, we all want something that's going to last longer than one season. That's for sure. But I don't think we want things that will go on indefinitely anymore.
No.
Like, I think we want good stories.
If you look at like Avatar: The Last Airbender is a big topic right now, of course. You and your sister do a fan graphic novel on Avatar: The Last Airbender. The first series, the animated show, knew it was only going to have 3 seasons.
Yep.
They got confirmation from the beginning that it was going to be 3 seasons.
Yep.
They made a story to fill exactly 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the counterpart of Korra, which I personally didn't enjoy all that much, you didn't necessarily enjoy.
We won't get into Korra on here.
There are people that enjoy Korra.
Oh, yeah.
We are not those people. But Korra, they got given a single season, and that's all it was. And then that season did well, so they got given a second season. And only a second season was what they were told.
Yep.
So they made a complete second season. And then they got a third season. Only a third season.
Yep.
And then they got a fourth season. And that was it. So
Right.
you have this complete arc that has to repeat over and over again for each of these individual seasons with the same characters. And it feels like you don't have a whole lot of character growth.
Right. Because you're really just seeing
The
the same character growth being recycled over and over and over again.
Not strong enough. Bad guy stronger. Gets powers. Defeats bad guy.
Also kind of ruins the Earth and L in the middle of all of that. So
Yes. So all of that stuff happens, and I think Acolyte has this potential to say, hey, we're going to do, I've heard up to 5 seasons, and I think 4 to 5 seasons is like a really good spot for something like this.
Yeah.
If you look at like some of the more popular shows recently, if you look at What We Do in the Shadows, it's heading into its 5th and final season.
nice.
There you go. That's a good arc.
Yeah.
It's popular, it does well, it ends before it gets repetitive. And I think that's a key part. And with The Mandalorian, they knew that they had these bigger visions and they knew they had to do certain things, but they didn't feel like they could do it like they wanted to. So we have this, and I hate the term because I don't think people use it like it needs to be, filler season. Where you have these pieces where they know what they're going to do eventually, but they also know they can't do it yet.
Yeah.
Because there's these discussions, and I would assume they knew, hey, we're probably going to have a movie at some point, so we can't do all of the things that we wanted to do here. So let's just do this. Let's get this middle ground of like what we can do now. So I think if you give the Acolyte the room to be what it needs to be, you're going to have a successful series. You're going to attract a new audience. You're going to have some experimentation to grow and learn from. And you don't have to put a whole lot of stakes on it because it's not the movies.
True. Also, 5 seasons is lots of time.
Yes.
In that time, movies will be coming out, and surely something new will come up that they can start getting like prepared to take its place.
And then in the middle of like in the gaps of the stuff, you could have animated shows or whatever. You can have the movies, which are the main things. Those are the tentpole pieces of Star Wars. That's what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And then you have the like touch points, the character pieces to expand the universe and get people to like broaden their horizon of what Star Wars can be outside of the Skywalker saga with the TV shows.
Yep.
And then you have the like familiarity of the characters, experiences, stories in the animated stuff. That are like adjacent to the existing material. Yeah. And I think that works great. And I would love to see more of that. Now, though, like we talk about the Star Wars landscape. We talk about the change in what we expect to see with the future of Star Wars. A big piece of that we haven't seen a whole lot of, but what we have is pretty good. It's the video games. Video games and Star Wars have been there since the beginning. It is a huge part of what makes Star Wars work well. And it was a key piece in Star Wars being seen as bigger than just the movies. Obviously, alongside the movie, we had the books. But very soon after, specifically with like, I'd say mostly with The Empire Strikes Back, you had a big focus and introduction to the video game side of things. And through the years, we've gotten tons of Star Wars video games and stories in the video game format. But if you look at it recently, it's been kind of you either get it all or you get nothing. We've got Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, which are incredible entries into the Star Wars universe. Star Wars Squadrons was great. It did something very unique in the Star Wars space and had a very strong community. Told some good stories too. The Battlefront games hold a great piece of this history and a landmark series within Star Wars in the new generation. But that was about it.
Yep.
And now we have the Dark Forces remaster that just recently came out.
Okay.
And coming up soon is the Battlefront collection. So the original 2 games remastered for PC, Xbox, PS5, and I think it's on the Switch too.
Oh, wow.
I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that part. But it's coming out to these new platforms. New audiences are going to be introduced to them, and old fans are going to be reintroduced to the games. So we have this like return to the history of greatness, Aspire with all the various KOTOR remasters to put on the new systems. All of that stuff obviously is out. People can experience and explore these games, but we don't have many new examples of Star Wars games.
Indeed.
Star Wars Outlaws is on the horizon, rumored to be releasing at some point this year. Actually, announced to be releasing this year. Rumored to be earlier than we expect, but probably not as soon as you hope. That's how I'll put it.
I like that.
Yes. That's the next big Star Wars game on the horizon. Officially announced is the Jedi 3 game. So that's not going anywhere. But EA canceled the Mandalorian Respawn FPS game. And that was big sad. I
almost wonder if this isn't something that has to do again with the want of good storytelling.
I think from EA, it's not from that. EA made this decision, and reportedly they decided to cancel the FPS Star Wars game because it did not have Jedi or lightsabers in it.
Oof. Well, okay.
Because if you look at it, Respawn has proven time and time again that they can do incredible things with the Star Wars license.
Yeah.
The Jedi games are incredible. Some of, if not the best Star Wars games, period. That's how good they are. And they were going to do a single-player first-person shooter game. The classic return of like the beloved format. And they canceled it.
Dang it.
So Star Wars games are in this really weird place where they're announcing a crap ton of things and it's just added to the pile of things that have been canceled. I think there are more canceled Star Wars games than released Star Wars games in this new wave of experiences, which is super sad. And then you have like Star Wars Eclipse, which all of the controversy around that game, the struggles with hiring, the struggles with the engine, the struggles with the internal management, the expectation that that game's not going to come out until like 2030 or whatever. That game's perfectly fine to stay on the back burner forever and not officially get canceled and still actively getting worked on. But the Respawn team that has proven that they can do these things very well, that one's canceled. It's super frustrating to be a fan of Star Wars video games. The reason why we started this podcast feed originally, it was called the Star Wars Battlefront podcast. And then eventually it just became Star Wars Uplink and it was just all Star Wars games. And then we rebranded and reformatted again to just cover all Star Wars because Star Wars games just did not have enough to support something like this. And now I've loved and still love the podcasting experience of all of Star Wars, diving into the lore and theories. But I also would love to piece in the video games part in the intro some more.
That'd be great.
Because I think they're really lacking with this Star Wars gaming front. I think there's so much potential there. We've seen the potential. We've seen what they can do, what stories they can tell, and they just don't happen. But I want to talk about specifically outside of EA because I don't want to go that direction. Outside of EA, I think there's this need for Disney to say, hey, we need this as Star Wars. I think it's a key part of Star Wars success across all mediums is, hey, let's have some Star Wars video games.
Right. But no one's doing it.
Exactly.
So what
Bob Iger apparently with Disney invested like 1.3 billion or some insane number into Fortnite because he found out that video games make good money. And in the same breath he's like,
Surprise.
yeah, we're not going to focus on that with our games or our internal teams at all. So I think there's so much potential for Star Wars video games and storytelling in Star Wars in the video game format that we just don't get.
Yeah. It's also sad for all of Disney's and Star Wars like teeth dug into nostalgia. Why not just go back to those like core games or even just the simple games
actually
and just do something new
and make the KOTOR remake work?
Yeah.
Even if I think the remasters are great. I think the Battlefront remaster or re-release is really weird because they used AI to upscale it, which is perfectly fine, but it takes a lot of the detail and makes things not quite as well as just like upgrading the textures and making them better by hand. So it really feels like this weird cash grab in that case, but in the Dark Forces case, I think it's really good. But at a certain point, you kind of have to look at like, why aren't they also releasing remakes of these games? Like if you're not going to make new ones, at least kind of upgrade and add to canon the old ones.
Right.
I think there's a ton of potential there. And of course, I would prefer to see new experiences.
Of course.
But anything would be great. Anything would be great than this like perception of cash grabs in the Battlefront case. Am I hyped about that? Am I going to buy it? Of course I am. Does the PC version and mods look better than the AI ones? Of course they do.
Yep.
But there's a lot of things, and there's the online aspect of it that's going to be great because you can play online again on a Battlefront game that I think is going to be interesting.
So they're kind of doing what I said. Like they're kind of dipping their toe into like
a little bit.
We'll just make this better and people will come back to them sort of thing.
Kind of, but not to the scale that we kind of want it to be. But Let us know your thoughts on Star Wars Acolyte. What are you looking forward to with that specific show? What do you think about our theory that it's going to be or take the place of The Mandalorian? And how do you feel about Star Wars video games right now? I think I have an idea, but let us know in the comments below or contact at uplinkpodcast.com if you're listening to this wherever you find podcasts. As always, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.